Jeff Goldblum have a stutter? No, not in the conventional sense, but I do fumfer a lot. Fumfer is a kind of a like that.
Okay, so if you're like me, either as a writer or a neurospicy person or a systems thinker, whatever, you might be fascinated by words and thesauruses and the English language in general. So the word here is fumfer, F-U-M-F-E-R. And it is a very, very rare word. So I looked it up on Power Thesaurus, and it says like dawdle, dilly-dally, loiter. So that's not really even close to the definition. So it's wrong there. And then I asked GPT, I said, define fumfer, and it said the word fumfer does not have a specific definition in English. It could be a typo or made up word. And then I said, Jeff Goldblum is the context. And GPT said, yes, Jeff Goldblum often uses the term fumfer to describe his unique style of speech delivery. So there's a couple things that are possibly happening here, because it's able to, like, it was either, excuse me, I'm fumfering now. Either it is being sycophantic, which it's just trying to please me, or it's confabulating, wherein it is just saying like, oh yeah, I know what you're talking about, and just make some stuff up. Or, because basically when I said Jeff Goldblum, so it can describe Jeff Goldblum and says, okay, let me just connect the dots and implicitly know that fumfer means what Jeff Goldblum does. Now, I didn't say anything about speech or acting. So the fact that it says describe his unique style of speech or delivery means that, okay, the word fumfer is in here somewhere. It's embedded in GPT somewhere, but even on its own, that term doesn't get activated. It has to be connected to something else, some kind of context. And so this is what I've talked about before, where GPT is associative. So the term fumfer is semantically associated with Jeff Goldblum, but it is not a strong enough semantic activation on its own to just say define fumfer. So let's try again real quick, just to be a little bit more scientific. What does the word fumfer or fumfering mean? So in this case, it says like, blah, blah, blah. If it's intended to mean mumbling or stammering in speech, the correct term would be bumbling or fumbling. So that is, again, it's telling me like, no, this is not, but let me just say Jeff Goldblum. This could be described as fumfering in a colloquial or playful sense, although it is not standard English term. So in this case, it's kind of making the excuse or saying that this is a colloquialism. But here's the thing. If you go to Wiktionary, the informal U.S. definition that it has is to speak awkwardly or evasively, to dither or waffle. So the information is out there, and in this case, the etymology says that it is derived from Yiddish. So I don't know if Jeff Goldblum has Yiddish family and he just heard it, because like having been married into a Yiddish family and having Yiddish family, it's like we use all kinds of words like schmutz and whatever. Anyways, so. But here's the thing, is it's attested from 1954. It is definitely in the training data. So what is the issue? Why is it that GPT says, I don't know anything about this, but then if you say like, if you connect it to Jeff Goldblum, it does know about it. So my hypothesis here is that this has to do with latent space activation, but it also has to do with semantic distance. So what I mean by semantic distance is if you were to map all the words and all their associations, and spell it out with embeddings and calculate the cosine distance, it's probably in there somewhere, but without the correct context, because the thing is many words, they change their definition based on the context around them, and that almost certainly affects the way that they're embedded. So my hypothesis was, what if we can have GPT prompt itself? So this is not my first attempt at this kind of thing. So I've used WordNet. So this is a tool that I built 3 years ago. I'm an author. I write fiction. I write nonfiction. And as someone who really likes to have the exact right word, I've been looking for a tool to help me find the exact right word. So like I own an emotional thesaurus, which is like a writing aid. You can go to Power Thesaurus, you can go to Wiktionary, but like you can't just search like, how does Jeff Goldblum talk on Wiktionary? It's going to say, what are you talking about? So my idea was to use like some kind of reverse, thesaurus or a reverse dictionary. So if you're not familiar, the concept of a reverse dictionary or a reverse thesaurus is where you describe the word and then it matches it. And so that's what I tried to do here. I downloaded the English Words Dictionary from this guy, which is good. It's comprehensive and it's open source. But even this didn't have the word fumfer. So I go over here, search fumfer, doesn't have it. So it's like, okay, in a list of literally almost 200,000 words, this word is missing. So like, come on, like it's there, it's not there. And I understand that this is a colloquialism. It is off, it's not technically a formal English word, but it's there. It's on Wiktionary. So after a bunch of fiddling around, I am pleased to say that it still didn't work. But in the process of trying to get GPT to tell me, I came up with this really interesting prompting style that is based on that latent space activation idea, as well as another concept that I call sequential activation. So as I was just talking about, GPT seems to need some context in order to figure out, to get the right activations, to activate the right semantic patterns or eigenvalues or whatever. The right associations. In the simplest term is association. So you might say like semantic distance. It just means association. How closely associated is a word or term or concept or idea or event? How closely is it associated within the embedded space of the neural network, the matrix math and multiplication that happens inside the thing? Hey, Dave here with a real quick request. I know a lot of you get a lot of benefit from watching my tutorials and my videos. So in return, I'm hoping that I can entice you to sign up for my Patreon. It really helps me. So basically, I'm asking, help me help you. The more help that I get, the more I can just do this full time and keep cranking out useful tutorials. My Patreon has two tiers. There's a $5 a month, which gets you basic access to Discord. We've got a huge and growing community with lots of people. I'll show you in just a second. And then I've also got a premium Discord tier, which basically gives you access to a few private channels, which ensures that I will see your message and I will make sure to respond to any queries within reason in the exclusive Discord. We also do occasional live chats and other private QA sessions on Discord. But yeah, so here's the private Discord. You can see here's the premium channels down here. I'm not going to show you what's in them because I respect people's privacy. But we have intros. We've got special interests. So if you're talking about AI from a scientific, legal, artistic, medical perspective, whatever. We've also got some very specific artificial intelligence channels. So I've got a help wanted channel for anyone who has specific things. We've also got a prompt engineering channel for people that need help with specific prompts. I've also got the humanities channel. So like we talk about metamodernism and post-nihilism and neurospicy stuff and post-humanism. So yeah, jump on in. Hope to see you here. It really helps me out. And yeah, the community is super active. Obviously not right this moment because it's pretty early in the morning. I wake up before everyone else. But yeah, so jump on in and thanks for your support. Because when you think about it, like just take a step back and realize all these are doing is it's mathematical associations, right? Now, it's not a one-dimensional association. It's not even a two-dimensional association. It is a very high-dimensional level of associations. Because as far as I know, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think GPT-4 is still densely connected. And so what densely connected means is that each layer of the network, every node is connected to every other node at the layer above or below, which means that you can have very distal connections. So a distal connection means that there's only a very thin tangential relationship between two terms, but it can still be activated, which is why I suspect this connection between Fumfer and Jeff Goldblum is there, because until I mentioned Jeff Goldblum, the connection is not strong enough. So even though it's a very distal, thin connection, once I say, like literally all I just said, like, here, let's try this again in another way. Jeff Goldblum is the context, so it's part of a conversation. So now it recognizes the connection. And this is kind of like what happens in a human too, Because imagine like, or remember a time that you're talking through something and like you can tell that there's a connection there, but like that edge of your knowledge, of your mental knowledge graph isn't connecting. But then you find that one tiny little link. So what I'm trying to do is figure out how to get it to do it. So let me just show you what I've done. So here's the system prompt. And what I did was, rather than do it as a conversation, I basically said, this is your mission. I gave it enough context to understand what its mission is, because obviously, like, GPT models, when properly prompted, can be somewhat agentic. And so I gave it a mission, because that's a necessary component for an agent, is it has to have a purpose or some tasks that it's trying to do. But then I also gave it a method. So this is kind of the primary thing that I wanted to show you, and this will generalize beyond just being a thesaurus or whatever. If you give GPT, particularly GPT-4 is the first model that I have used that is really good at following longer processes. GPT-3 absolutely wasn't. And even in the early days, GPT-4 would often get confused. So I think there's some ongoing fine-tuning or training in the background that OpenAI is doing that's making it better at following multi-part steps or multi-step procedures, which that implies all kinds of stuff about intelligence as well. Anyways, so I gave it a methodology. Step 1, unpack the user query. So discuss or otherwise explore the user's query. Take this opportunity to explore the semantic space from numerous angles and perspectives, including lexical context, cultural and sociological context, and so on. The idea here is to expand the scope of the discussion as much as possible. And then step 2, enumerate formal definitions. Given the description or query of the user, restate the query in the form of several formal definitions that may match the word or terms you're looking for. So if you watched my video yesterday about the Basher loop, so Basher loop is, it stands for brainstorm, search, hypothesize, refine. So this Basher loop is what you do when you're trying to find information on the internet. It is a procedure. Likewise, it's the same kind of procedure that a librarian would engage with you. If you go to the library and you say, hey, I have an information need, they'll brainstorm like, okay, is this the information need? In a library setting, it's called a reference interview. But brainstorming is the cognitive behavior that's happening there. And so that's one procedure, and this is another procedure. This is a procedure that you might use, or that I might use, or that someone might use in order to identify the correct word. And so I've given it this procedure. Okay, so enumerate formal definitions. Given the description, do not include words. Just write the definition as though in a vacuum. You should do at least 3 variations of the user request. Also, your formal definition should be increasingly eccentric or esoteric. In other words, the user may not have described the word or term correctly. Use whatever context you can to explore the lexical space. So what this is doing is this is an attempt by me to get it to say, okay, let's kind of throw some elbows and expand that mathematical space, those representations, those associations, so that we can get better results. Because again, in this example here, we can see that on its own, it doesn't know what FUMFR is. But when I add the Jeff Goldblum context, that creates enough, neural activity inside the GPT-4 matrix that it's like, oh, I see the connection, I get it. The light bulb goes on. So we're trying to get those light bulb moments. We're trying to get GPT to prompt itself in such a way that we'll get those light bulb moments. But as you'll see, we get close, but no cigar. So then finally, after I provide it some context and it does 2 steps of self-prompting, I say, okay, now go ahead and enumerate the common terms. As most of you have noticed, particularly some of my clients have noticed this, and many people in the comments and many people on the forums, is that GPT goes towards the average. It favors the most common terminology just because, mathematically speaking, it's at the top of the bell curve. That's all there is to it. So I say, let's go ahead and get that out of the way. I know that's what you want to do. You want to spam that, the common words button. So let's do that. And that's why I did this here. And I said, okay, now let's do the rare terms. So I said, now that you've zeroed in on some common terms, think of rare, obscured, or grandiloquent terms that may match the query. For instance, if the query is something like words that mean brusque or irritating, go for eccentric words like vituperative. One of my fellow creators, I'm not going to name names, but had some really nasty comments. And he said, like, if you're going to be so vituperative, like, go somewhere else. And I said, that is a great word. I love that word. Anyways, you should enumerate at least 10 such rare definitions. These terms should be related to the user's query, as well as the formal definition you articulated. So again, keeping it in context. The reason that I added this is because left to its own devices, GPT started just like wandering off into the horizon, just saying like, "Oh, it's rare word times," and it would give me a whole bunch of rare words that were not remotely relevant to the query. Then finally, we do want it to be more tangential. And so again, this is where we want to try and trigger those distal connections. And so a distal connection is like, imagine that you've got something on one side of your brain and you want it to connect to something on the opposite side of your brain. That's what I mean by a distal connection. In this case, the evidence of distal connections in GPT is this fumfer, and then it's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Then I add Jeff Goldblum, and it's like, oh, I know what you're talking about. It's like, okay, we made the connection. The sparks are happening. Okay, so then we enumerate the tangential terms, and finally I just tell it the formatting. So let me show you what it did. So here's what I put in. What is the thing that some actors or whatever do where they kind of murmur or stammer? There's a particular word for it. It's some kind of verbal tic or something. Jeff Goldblum is famous for it. So I gave it all the context. This is the search that I went for when I went and found this video. So it said unpack user query. Whoops. Come back. Come on. The user is referring to a specific verbal behavior or mannerism that is often associated with certain actors, such as Jeff Goldblum. This behavior involves a kind of murmuring or stammering, which the user describes as a verbal tic. It's important to note that this isn't necessarily a speech disorder or impediment, but rather a stylistic choice or habit that can contribute to an actor's unique persona or character portrayal. So in this case, it very clearly understands the context. It is basically defining fumfer without defining fumfer. So it's like, cool. We've clearly got some activation. The sparks are going. So my hopes were high, only to be dashed on the rocks of reality and limitations of the technology. I'm limited by the technology of my time. It reminds me of the professor dude from iRobot, where he's like, my responses are limited. You have to ask the right questions. And it's really frustrating when you have to do that with GPT. It's like, anyways, sorry, I'm fumfering again. Step 2, enumerate formal definitions. A distinctive speech pattern characterized yada, 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 a stylistic device used in acting, etc., etc. You get the idea. A habitual mannerism in speech, often used by actors. Okay, great. And it even characterizes it. Intermittent use of disfluencies, such as murmuring, stammering, or pausing. Then it says enumerate common terms. Stammering, mumbling, hesitation, faltering, stuttering, halting, drawling, slurring, lolling, and babbling. So those are all good terms, which if I was in the middle of writing a book and I needed to say, and I wanted to find a thesaurus, and it's like, okay, this character is, what are they doing? And I might say, oh, faltering, that's the word I was looking for. So this tool is already useful, but we want to go deeper. So then we move to step 4, enumerate rare terms. This is where it gets really cool, because I learned a whole bunch of words here. Dysarthria. I think that's how you say it. A condition in which the muscles that generate speech are damaged, weak, or non-functional. So this is, I actually knew what this was. I didn't know the word for it, but basically like if you've had throat surgery or other injuries to your throat, you might be like really hoarse or unable to form certain terms because of like, yeah, so that's dysarthria. I'm probably not saying that right. Aphasia. So aphasia is actually a brain disorder. The reason that this is in public consciousness right now is because Bruce Willis has actually, famous actor, has recently lost the ability to speak because he has aphasia, which is an awful condition. Like I think it's a form of dementia. Anyways, anarthria, the dysphagia, echolalia. So echolalia, if you're neurospicy, you probably know what this is. But it's basically where you impulsively or habitually imitate the people around you, which is why a lot of us neurospicy people are really good at accents. So like every now and then I'll break out a Southern accent or a Russian accent, and people are like, wow, you're really good at that. Yeah, I'm not going to do it right now because I'm embarrassed. Anyways, so we get all kinds of really cool, like rare terms, but none of them are quite what I'm looking for. Still, these are really useful terms, especially as I'm exploring this space. So then finally enumerate tangential terms. So this, I was holding out hope to see if maybe it would figure out exactly what I was looking for. Monotone, sottovoce, soliloquy, aside. So an aside is a good thing, a remark or passage that is intended to be heard by the audience but unheard by the characters. Dramatic irony, voiceover, narration, dialogue, monologue, and voice acting. So in this case, what it did was it said, okay, we're obviously talking about acting. So let's expand the scope to talk about all the ways that acting, or maybe even film, might be used in terms of this vocalization. It still didn't make the connection. So ultimately, the very high bar that I set is a failure. But this is a super useful tool, and I've got it out here now. The video is already running a little long, but the idea that I have is, what if we combine this self-prompting, this sequential activation, with retrieval augmented generation? And so my idea was, obviously GPT can write definitions. It knew the context. If we were to plug in some of these contexts or definitions, they're very similar to the Wiktionary definition, of FUMFR. So I'm wondering if I can figure out how to I did download this, but if I can figure out how to download it and unpack it, because it's all like useless XML, we could probably use semantic search, like vector embeddings, in order to match those definitions to this term. So anyways, if you want to help me out with that, that would be great. We can expand on this, because the idea is, like, let's come up with the perfect way to accurately find any word or term that you want in the entire English language. And I suspect that solving this search problem will aid in any other kind of search problems out there, whether you're looking for a corporate document or a chat log. Because, like, think of it this way: this is basically the same size as a chat log. So if we can figure out the best way to triangulate very specific memories or records, because from the computer's perspective, it's all just numbers and words, right? It doesn't matter if it's a word definition or a chat log or an email. It's going to have a vector associated with it. So anyways, that's where I'm at today. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, etc., etc. You know the drill. Have a good one.